Welcome, everyone. Welcome. If you can please grab a seat. Thank you. I'm incredibly excited. We'll be talking about from AI to web3.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. I am Dominic, the moderator, senior reporter at TechCrunch, and along with Omicron and Yahoo, we are so happy to present this panel to you today. Before we begin, I will give everyone just a brief moment to introduce themselves. Would you like to go first?
Of course. Good morning, everyone, from Cannes. It's quite nice. My name is Toby Ajala. I'm the CEO and founder of a software house called TechT. We build early adoption-based technology for brands, businesses, corporations around the world.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Hobley. I'm the Chief D&I Officer of Omnicom Precision Marketing Group.
Clearly you have fans. I am Orchid Richardson, SVP of Digital at Blavity, where we represent Black and brown creators in the emerging majority space.
And okay, let's start. So this first question is for everyone. What are the different ways in which your respective companies expect to use AI in the upcoming years? It's quite a broad question, but
Should I go first?
yes.
I think this is an order thing. I'm okay with that. Something I very often talk about is AI's most pivotal and most important use will be around the efficiency of everyday work. I think that is its biggest case study for minimizing and making efficient how we construct emails, order tasks. I run a software company, so I have a slew of developers, and managing and dealing with things like scrum lists and points on a board and how long it takes to complete a task versus how much we should charge a client, all those kind of things. AI has really improved and hastened how we process those things. And that is predominantly what we use it for internally. Externally, we also use AI. We build AI for some of our partners in different ways, and that is almost for infinite reasons, but predominantly for us, it's around making our everyday tasks a lot more efficient.
From an Omnicom perspective, I'll say on the customer experience side, we've made a bunch of announcements this week around partnerships, either with Microsoft, et cetera, with Adobe, around how we're using it or deploying it in the customer experience space to either understand better what people are doing, how to segment people, how to target people, how to create content a la generative AI, how to optimize and understand metrics, how to produce content in a bunch of different ways. The conversation on the customer experience side is quite robust, and you're seeing a lot of that already start to show up. I think I said yesterday on a panel, I'm more intrigued actually by the employee experience side of the equation, because there's not, the conversation feels a little bit more nascent in terms of how we, particularly in the DEI space, understand the health of the company, who's there, what skills we have, who are we hiring, what representation actually looks like, what the barriers are to that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on the inside of the company to leverage AI to create more access, more participation, more connectivity. It's like, I think it's a generational, like, it's like, this is like the iPhone or the internet. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think from the Blavity perspective, we do a lot of the things that you guys have echoed, especially around leveraging the technology for efficiency. I think we even have expanded into leveraging it for creating content and to help telling our authentic stories in a way that we can leverage the technology, as well as mapping out and leveraging our data to think about how we're planning our business moving forward, where our audiences are going, how they're digesting content, so that we're able to meet them where they are at that moment in time.
Tony, from a marketing perspective, where is the benefit in using AI for like targeting and content and measurement compared to a human? And what improvements have you already seen in those measurement areas?
My background is CRM, and before I got in the DA&I game, I was in that space, and I think the technology, everything we always talked about doing, like in the 90s and the 2000s, from a customer relationship perspective, and how you could engage with people, personalize content, understand audiences, dissect audiences, build models to predict stuff, come up with new metrics, like just all of the things. The technology has so far exceeded whatever we thought we could do, and in good ways and in bad ways. So I'm just saying, like, whether it's your ability to identify people, like down to the 1 or 2 person segment level, and to build out journeys, to create content that's associated with that person, to produce it really quickly, to put it out, see what's actually happening, and optimize and monetize it. It's incredible. So I'm like, from a marketing perspective, I'm like, the possibilities are endless. Some of them just are not good.
And Orchid, do you have anything to add? I know you spoke about measurement.
Yeah, so we're leveraging it really to use all of the data assets that we have in-house. So one of the things that Blavity does is we have a in real life event called Afrotech, where we're meeting 25,000 people a year in Austin and engaging with them. And so we're using AI to better understand our consumers, so that as we think about the content that we want to produce and push out, that we're actually addressing their specific concerns and identifying the right people to collaborate with. AI has been very helpful in figuring out the right influencers, so that when we're using AI, we're using it in such a way that we address some of the biases that show up in it. And so that has been really helpful. And then and not just depending on the AI, but leveraging the human connection and understanding that it's only a ways to a means. It's not the ultimate way that we get to our audience. Has been really impactful for us.
And we kind of spoke about this a little bit before during panel prep, but I was really interested to know more about the challenges that you face regarding algorithms and implementing it. And so can you start and then go down?
Yeah. So the algorithm thing, I mean, we'll hear it all over and over again about how Black and brown people are misrepresented. Of course, we all know that that's an over-challenging thing, that's an ongoing challenge that we face. I think the big way to overcome that is that we really have to be advocates for our space, right? And so oftentimes, Black and brown people are represented in the media, and they show up in certain ways. So for example, if a non-Black person sees a Black man walking down the street and he has braids in his hair, sneakers, they may say that's somebody who that may rob me, or be afraid to see that person. I see that same person, and I see my son who just graduated from college with honors. And so that's the nuances that we're seeing in AI, because the Black voice is not represented in that technology, in the informing of those algorithms. It becomes really important that we bring those stories to the forefront and help to inform those algorithms and mathematical things as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo the point about training, the importance of data sets, and the training and validation processes. I think a colleague of mine used the example yesterday, and I believe it was Microsoft. Microsoft, I apologize if it wasn't you, but I think like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, they created a chatbot based on a Twitter data set. And it became what you would expect to see, given the Twitter data set. It was not a very good look. And I think what we're going to increasingly see is the importance of curating the data set so that you get the outcome that you actually want, and the people who are actually training and validating it have many voices and some ethical representation. And then I think the other part I mentioned yesterday is the importance of prompt engineering or prompt design, the questions you actually ask the AI to get the answer that you want, and then your ability to like nuance what you see and not just take it and run and like sort of give it to somebody. I think there's a lot of complexity to this, and we have to train people to like sort of interact with it in a way that is actually beneficial.
Those are very good answers. And to be frank, I think it's just building upon that to say that there's an element around the people behind building the software for AI. And I think that that's been something I've been shouting from the top of the rooftops for 5+ years. And that's around there aren't enough Black people, women, people of color building the actual technology. the more we encourage access to not just the use and training of these data sets and these AI models, but the actual build. We can see that in the fact that it took 17 years for facial recognition to recognize white faces versus black faces. The University of Chicago recently came out with a study at the beginning of this year that said that AI can predominantly can't tell the difference between black faces and what is essentially shadows and just any other element. So there's a real disconnect between the foundations of the making of AI and everything else. And that's just building upon everything else they've said, because it's also so relevant.
And that actually leads into my next question, which was, how do you get more black and brown faces as engineers and coders in this space?
Should I start?
Yes.
Okay, big question. I mean, I was a software developer for about 6 years before I met another black person who was a software developer. I started very young. I was 15. I was very isolated, using any and everything I could find out online, even though I learned how to write software via a library textbook. But that was many, many years ago. And things have changed. I think the way we can get more people of color, very specifically black people, into software development is by showcasing more of what it can do. Technology influences everything. And by us reiterating the narrative of software development being very much a intensive hundreds of thousands of lines of code and head down and isolation and 8 hours of coding, which in all honesty it is, but then also the amazing things that come from it. We have been working with AI for a while and even machine learning, and we recently, sometime last year, we launched some camera facial recognition tracking software with Essence, a Canadian luxury clothing brand. And they had a block party, and we had the technology. So we said, for your block party, let's put 200 cameras on the ceiling of this venue and use our technology to reiterate that. And to many people, it seems like, okay, cool, you guys wrote a bunch of technology. I was at the party. We launched it, it deployed, it worked well, and then the team, we just had a good time at the party. So it's about showing what the technology can build and then enjoying that. I think we need to show more of that as a story.
I think that was brilliant.
Thank you, Tony.
I think there's an access problem in terms of people being able to even sit at the table to learn these skills. But I think there's also an aspiration problem in terms of even wanting to do this kind of work in the first place. And maybe part of the barrier, I'm not sure, I can only speak for when I was growing up, it was intimidating. The math, there were a bunch of things and it wasn't because you can't do it. It was just in order to get into this game, you had to see yourself doing it, and then you had to sort of be willing to focus on the activities. Think of it akin to engineering, or understanding how to put together a car. They're quite complicated things, but the ability to aspire to make something, I think is powerful. And having black and brown people aspire to make stuff and not be intimidated by what it takes to actually do it. And then having the access to learn the skills. And I think the more we can there's things like, what's the Google certification program? I can't remember what it is, but companies are starting to build certification programs to teach people the skills, and they're free. And the reason they're free is because they need the talent. But we have to actually want to show up and take advantage of that opportunity, and it opens up all kinds of doors, and that's how we get in the game.
Yeah, I would even add, even to that, beyond the aspiration and the inspiration to be involved in it, I really think it comes down to access. So oftentimes, sure, there's the coding class that's available for free, but oftentimes our communities don't know about it. And so it really comes down to making sure that from a corporate responsibility perspective, that they're actually meeting us, and it's our responsibility to meet us where we are, and whether that is in the high schools or elementary schools, so that we know that this is a career path that we can take and have. And so I think that is the way you solve how do you get more people that look like us into coding and technology? We have to actually meet them where they are, as opposed to say, come over here, when we don't know them.
And following up on that, this is also probably perhaps for you, Orchid. Of course, we need more access in schools and to address the pipeline. But what role does the media and entertainment play in touching on the new generation and making them want to enter tech and financial literacy and all these things?
So I think part of the challenge with the media today is because it misrepresents us so much that oftentimes it becomes a turnoff. And so I go back to my analogy, the black boy who walks down the street that has dreadlocks, whether or not someone else sees him as a criminal, I see him as my son who just graduated with honors. And so I think it's more, we have to figure out how do we get back to responsible media so that we're represented in such a way that we want to be a part of it. It's not perceived as a negative. So I think that's part of the challenge, is that because of the way the media perceives us, it becomes responsible for companies like Blavity and others like us to represent us in a way that's authentic in our voice and do great storytelling, so that we create opportunities for our kids to be interested in this field.
And let's talk about the workplace really quick. There is a fear that AI will replace people. How worried should Black and brown non-coders and engineer be about this?
I'm trying to mince my words because it's such a question, and I can't believe how big it's blown up. But we as human beings don't know that much, and even collectively. And AI is a sum of all of that information. However, it only feeds off of what we've given it. And there are so many more things we do not know. And it's for us as human beings and all of the God-given power that we have to figure certain things out. And then we can go tell the AI models, but at that point, it's old information. I understand how people see it today because it's this huge thing. It's wowing everybody. It's doing things that people didn't realize it could do. But there is absolutely no way that AI will ever learn empathy in a way that human beings should provide empathy. It will never understand or be able to replicate true human behavior. As much as people think iRobot is going to come to life, it's not happening in the way that a lot of people seem it to be. So my answer to that is, sure, it will overtake certain things. It will make things that we have been doing in a manual way easier, but the bigger picture is that it won't take away from our brilliance as human beings. Can't happen.
Whoa. This question is always complicated. The answer is yes and no. I mean, yeah, are there some tasks that are going to get automated? I mean, there's conversations about the impact of AI on trucking. There's conversations about the impact of AI on writing. There's one right now, the Writers Guild strike in the US. There's a whole conversation about content creation, how you get paid, how AI uses your work. And I think in some of those cases, there's a valid concern, which is that there's some things that AI can probably do better than humans. But I think for me, the conversation is, well, what does that mean in terms of us changing our skill set and moving up the value chain so that we become the users, the interpreters, the nuancers? To your point about empathy, AI can't do that. You don't want it making the decisions. What you want is it giving you an input and actually removing some repetitive work and giving you a perspective that maybe you didn't have before. That's what it's good for. It's not about it's going to replace. I don't think it's going to replace me. I think I'm pretty good at what I do. So I think that's the conversation that we hopefully will be having with people, is how do we leverage this technology to do better, different, more, not instead of.
Yeah, I think it just drives efficiencies that we couldn't get otherwise. I mean, it's the same thing we used to use horse and buggies to get around, and now we use cars. And so humans didn't go away. We still had people to drive the cars, and so it's very similar to IA. We still will have to have humans to inform those algorithms, to help them grow and learn over time. So I don't think it's a replacing of humans. I think it's just the evolution of how humans, a new evolution of how humans will interact with technology moving forward.
And kind of on the other side of that, it might be too early to tell, but what can companies do to ensure that they're not disproportionately replacing black and brown talent while implementing AI?
Oh, yeah. I caught the question. Could you repeat the question?
Repeating the question.
Thank you.
What are ways that companies can ensure they are not disproportionately replacing black and brown talent while implementing AI?
Good question. Ask. I was going to come up with some fancy answer. There isn't one. Ask the damn question. The problem I think a lot of leaders are facing at the moment is they go one or two ways. They lean into it or they lean away. They lean in so heavy that they're like, okay, everything's got to go, AI come in place. Or they lean away and say, this is absolutely ridiculous, we don't need any of it. And I know that's very much a reductionist statement, but because there are many people that live in the middle of that. But there is also an element as a leader, knowing other leaders and spending a lot of my time working with the other leaders, of almost pride or embarrassment of not fully understanding what it means. And if you're going to leaning into it too much. And for that, they're saying, without really asking a very wide, a very intentional question about whether this is effective or not, or whether it's important or not, or whether it's going to create a ripple effect that's going to turn into a wave. To say that as a clothing brand, instead of using models as a whole, knowing full well that your audience engage best with models of color or just a variety of individuals, and deciding to replace that with AI, you're not asking yourself any question of value. You're just doing. So my answer to that is ask the right questions.
Yeah. So it's a very relevant topic right now. I think the last 3 or 4 years, we spent a bunch of time, effort, and energy making sure that we're trying to bring more people of color into the organizations. As the organizations were growing and changing, et cetera. And now we're in a different economic environment where we're having to make some really tough decisions. And at least our focus, my focus, Emily's focus, is around trying to ensure that we're not undoing that work. When you have to make these kinds of decisions, and when you do have to make them, that you do it with integrity based on what you've said. The reality is it is impacting communities of color. Just frankly, the math. You came first in, or what is it? Last in, first out conversation. So we can see it. But I think as companies, you need to actually look for this. You need to look in the data. You need to understand what's happening, so you can have the conversation and actually do something about it. And one of the things these technologies do is they allow you to do that work, and they can actually tell you when these things are happening faster than you might be able to look for them. And I think we need to leverage the power of these things to look for where the problems are. And we don't do that enough. So.
Yeah. I think it just comes down to the arguments that we've already been having about DEI and making sure that the right people are in the room making the right decisions. So the technology is the technology, but if you have the right people in the room who are cognizant of why it's important to have diverse voices in the room, I think they'll make the right decisions about when it's time to figure out to replace black and brown people or white people or any person with AI and technology. It really comes down to the advocacy work that we're already doing and to pushing that forward. So when there's decisions about AI is being made, my voice is represented at the table.
And as AI is used to gather more data and personalize content and all these things, how do you all approach the issue of data privacy and security?
We were just having a joke when we were walking on that I've given up on my data privacy and security because I've given so much. I think that there is a responsibility for government to get involved in setting the standards. I don't trust us as an industry to do that for us. I mean, we can't even figure out measurement. So I think it becomes down to the government and the regulation bodies to figure out how to make sure that they are protecting us and forcing them to come up with the rules around how we engage around it. I think that's really important.
Off of that point, I agree. There is a huge responsibility on governments, but I also think there's a huge responsibility on the businesses that build the technology. I agree. I also have given up on my days, and I say that as a founder of a company who builds a lot of data models. Right? It sounds kind of funny, but yes, before we really understood how much data we were giving away, we'd already given away too much. Where we stand right now is to only stand our ground and say, listen, we're using the phones, we're using the platforms, we're using the databases. Those who are in charge, those who are the gatekeepers, just make sure you're doing a good job and not exploiting us. History books say things like that don't work, but with more information, we now know more. We can now ask for more. We can now speak from an educated standpoint about more. So, yeah, it's a worry, but the onus is on the businesses, the brands, and the governments, the people that are in charge.
Yeah, there's a lot of responsibility to go around, and I think there's like 3 levels of it. Like you said, from a government perspective, and I think the Europeans have probably done a better job than the U.S. has from a GDPR perspective versus GDPR perspective. But and whatever the legislation in the U.S., it's the internet. I think it's like C230 or like I forget what it's called, but like that legislation was written like in the 90s. Right. All right, and like the amount of progress and change in technology, like it's crazy that they have not changed that law. So there's like you said, there's a responsibility at the governmental level to keep up, to understand the implications, to keep up with the technology and to adjust to it. At the business level, one of the promises of web3 and blockchain was that it would create, give us more control and decentralize, because right now everything we do is mediated through all of these big tech companies, and they own the data once you give it to them. So I'm like, that sort of promise of moving to something where we can control, we can access services, but we can control who uses our data is the promise. And businesses have a responsibility to show up there. And then the last thing I think is it's on us, and I think about like my daughter. She's 5, and I think about what she's gonna run into when she starts to see social media. I mean, she already sees it on YouTube Kids, and I'm like, it's kind of on me to teach her the nuance of what you see versus what you give and where that sort of line is. And I think in some ways, we've lost perspective, or our kids have lost perspective on what should be private and what shouldn't be private. Like everything is out there in the world, and it's like, you gotta remember, that stuff's out there in perpetuity. So be careful. So, sorry, I think there's a lot of responsibility there, but everybody's got slightly different responsibilities.
I was actually going to bring up Web3 because I was interested to know if anyone on the stage was still interested in using elements of Web3 to kind of gauge consumer interest or engagement.
We'd have to have another panel. But the answer is yes, absolutely. But the concept around Web3 and what Web3 actually is, I believe, is misconstrued in most minds. Web3 is a further iteration of the interconnectivity of computers. It's happening. There's no argument about it, even though people want to argue and say, no, it's a fallacy. It's not something to argue about. Web 1 came, Web 2 came, we're still in Web 2, and we're gonna be here for a long time before Web 3 completely takes over. But Web 3 will also be a summary of parts from Web 2, as much as Web 2 is a summary of parts of Web 1. And, you know, 2019, 2020, 2021, we saw NFTs absolutely skyrocket. And people want to absolutely blanket web3 as NFTs and blockchain and crypto, when it's so much more. web3, in Tech T's description, is the very normal full adoption of AR and VR into web-based systems. And that's something that we're working on very heavily. Reducing that server load, making that technology so accessible that you can very much package it into solutions and put it onto a web-based platform of any kind in the same way you can do any kind of plugin. So Web3 is still, and I believe will forever be relevant. The buzzwords and the elements that are a summary of Web3 are still very much in discussion.
I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah, I just say ditto.
When it comes to the adoption of new tech trends, how do we make sure that Black media and founders get the opportunity to keep up with the innovation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
When it comes to the adoption of new tech trends, how do we make sure that Black media and founders get the opportunity to keep up with the innovation?
So I would answer that question in the reverse. Black media, Black founders are actually the trendsetters. And so it's really about the general market keeping up with us. So we define the trends. We are the first to embrace technology. Our youth are always the first to have the most tech-savvy phones if we can afford it. So I think that it's really about we have to continue to set the trends and take credit for the work that we do. And help to push that forward. And I think the next iteration of what we are is about complete ownership of our technology and ownership of our audience and ownership of our voices and how we're putting them out.
Again, I got nothing to add to that.
Well, this topic is very close to my heart because that's what my business is, the foundation of my business, the foundation of Tech T. We build early adoption-based technology for our partners. So it really is about us working on NFTs and quote-unquote the metaverse. We did not name it that. Nobody who actually built a version of the metaverse early on actually called it that. But we were doing it in 2018, 2019, and it rolled out over the last couple of years. I agree, Orchid. Black people are the ones to set the trends, but the problem with that is there are a lot of people that pay attention, and a lot of people don't have Black people, the interest of Black people in heart. So Black people set trends. Large organizations and individuals with keen, good eyes will take those things, adopt them into those large organizations, and scale them by 1 million times more. And I know Orchid, you mentioned how ownership is important. It's so important, but it still gets overlooked at, in my opinion, the same rate as it always has been. I have a very manual approach to your question, which is when we build something really cool with a brand, with a business, whether it be Apple, whether it be Essence, whether it be whoever, there is always a follow-up. There is always, how do we scale this more? How do we adapt this so it's not just a one-bang project? It's not just one solution that is irrelevant from the marketing or the media cycle 3 months later. And that is where we then position people of color, Black people, those that actually set those trends, those that actually defined those original thoughts in place to say, okay, if you want to now do this properly, we've helped you build this piece of technology to really showcase it, to utilize it, to have it tested in the right ways. This is when you need to partner with so-and-so. Because partnership, collaboration happens way more than I believe people understand. It happens in everything. And I believe Black people, people of color, those that are setting those trends should be part of that conversation always.
I think I do have some perspective to add to this. I think as it relates to the allocation of capital and the way you think about the way VCs, the way that companies think about investment, the narrative is changing. Because like over the past 3, 4, 5 years, everything's been about your story and growth. Like they allocate dollars to people that they think have a powerful story, and they haven't been so worried about the financials per se. I think that the economic shift that's actually happened are causing people to rethink what they allocate dollars based on, and it's not so much about your story, and it's really about like the numbers, okay? And so our ability as a community and as people who want to found businesses, you really have to think about what story you need to tell in order to get access to capital. And I think probably the biggest opportunity is to help people sort of figure out what is that story you need to tell, and to diversify the rooms where the VCs are, the people who are making decisions about the allocation of capital, because those rooms are not diverse at all. Okay, so I'm a little bit like, we got to do, there's a longer term play there, there's a shorter term play around just helping people get their stories right so that they can get the money.
And my last question before maybe we can do audience questions. What other exciting technologies are you using to foster inclusion at your respective workplaces and companies? What other exciting technologies are you using to foster inclusion at your company?
I mean, I'm still trying to figure these out. We are, like I said, I think I started this by saying on the employee experience side, I mean, the things we're doing on the client/customer side, like bursting at the seams. There's a bunch of people working like crazy on generative right now. So like, I'm much more interested in, we have a partnership with Microsoft. How do I work with we just built a D&I and a talent dashboard, and I'm like, how do I start to leverage AI more in terms of understanding things I would never even know to look for? That's interesting to me. We have a partnership with Greenhouse, where I'm going, help me figure out the right sort of balance or the equation around how do I use this in hiring, but not in a bad way, because I don't want AI to screen people out. Like, but there's some opportunity there. How do I think differently about bias detection in job descriptions, et cetera, from a learning L&D perspective? We have a partnership with Cornerstone. Like, how do I serve up better content to the right people and make it faster? So there's a bunch of things that we can do with the technology that we already have. I'm not necessarily looking for like new stuff.
In true tech tea fashion, we're doing something slightly different, but relates to everything you speak about, Tony. We're building an AI model of our own, one to be able to mitigate and detect racial bias in language. It's something that's been pressing on our hearts for a couple of years now, and we've spent almost a year building it, and it's kind of cool, I have to say. It's pretty amazing. There's still a lot of work to do, because the question I ask myself every day, and we continue asking each other in the team, how do you define racial bias in language? Is a very difficult question to ask anybody. So it's funny enough, we're talking about AI and technology, it's essentially science, and I was about to say it's not an exact science, and technically it isn't, but that's what language models are for. They're for learning, and at some point, we don't know. I don't know. I'm the CEO, I don't know. But we will launch it, and it will be available for people to use, and it will be used in the right way. And that is going to be Tech T's, contribution to the world in this initial contribution to the world in this very rapidly growing age of AI.
Yeah. And I would just add, Blavity happens to be a 100% virtual company.
Love that.
Yes, it's awesome. But as a result, AI and technology is woven throughout our entire company, is because it helps us to stay connected, it helps us develop efficiencies, it helps with content development. I think that we are probably the personification of how you leverage technology and AI to deliver high products and interesting content to a super engaged audience.
All right, let's do maybe one or two audience questions, if anyone has any. Okay.
Yeah, just...
Hello, I mean, your panel discussion is, is divine. I started a new tech startup company that focuses on Web3 and AI. And just to hear you guys speak about all the subject matters, you know, the whole fear behind where's AI going, Web3, and the buzzwords that people seem to run for. I was the executive career director at Universal Orlando Resorts, in-house creative marketing group, and we launched a new division that focuses on Web3, AI, and of all the people who came in to speak to us about the future of the industry, there were no black and brown people coming to speak at Universal. So that's why I stepped away and said, let me start my own thing, because I think that in the black and brown communities, we're not informed enough to empower ourselves to know that not only are big companies in this field and doing big things, but we seem to be the last one that is getting involved and getting embraced with. Around VC capital and fundraising, I realized that it's very difficult for people of color to get their projects funded because we don't have access to it. What kind of things would you guys recommend? What kind of pitfalls have you guys experienced when you're trying to get your first tech product picked up? What kind of things do you advise for people who are trying to actually break in and actually get their things noticed?
This is a very interesting question because I don't get to tell people often that tech tea is a business that has no investors. The sole investor was me and the money I made. So it's 100% owned by a black woman, and we get to do technically whatever we want, which is nice. So I haven't done the VC round. I haven't had to pitch to 100 plus people, unfortunately, but I have a slew of friends who are entrepreneurs and leaders that, especially right now, are going through the hardest time. Raising at the moment, I think across the board, continents is extremely difficult. And the only thing I can offer as an answer to your question is around support. Community is huge for me, and not just around the other CEOs and the other founders that I know, but also in my personal life, my family, my cousins, you know, the people I have personal relationships with and how they support me. So when it comes to seeing the people that I know and love currently going through fundraising rounds and having a really hard time, I literally ask, how can I lend myself to help you? A lot of these founders aren't technical, and they have to go and then talk about the technology. And I say, I'll come with you. Tell them I'm your interim CTO. And not in a, we're trying to scam anyone here. But if you need a consultant, if you need someone that can speak the high and the low level, very technical lingo. I am a software developer. That's where it started. I still code. We can talk about what you want to pitch. I can direct you in the right places. And then I can also go and help you have these conversations if there is an area in which you lack. And sometimes it is in the technology arm. Sometimes it's from a marketing point of view. Sometimes it's from a growth point of view. I think this is the time where we look at our counterparts, look at our peers, those that can help, and ask them to help. That's all I can imagine, because at the end of the day, especially if, I mean, this doesn't apply to everybody, but most products, most businesses that are going for funding, it's usually a really good idea. And it's not that the idea is broken. It's usually not that the deck is rubbish. It's a class thing. It's a race thing. It's the world that we live in thing. And when that is the case, the only thing I can ever think of is lending a hand to say, what can I do to help? Within capacity. But what can I do to help? That's all I think about. I hope that answers your question.
And I think we have time for one more. Okay, you. Yes.
Thanks for the talk today. It was divine. So my name is Mike Warner. I have an integrated communications firm out of New York. And my question is probably the reverse of what we've been talking about in terms of AI tech separating people. I've had a difficult time getting people back in the office. And the reason that we like getting people back in the office is I feel there's a level of mentorship that the younger generation is not getting when they're not touching, feeling, loving us on a day-to-day basis. So I do appreciate the efficiencies of the remote And we operate like that as a necessity, and has opened up the pool for talent, being able to get people from all over the world to work with us and not have the expense as a mom and pop shop. However, there is a level of mentorship that I just don't feel that the younger generation is getting, and as they are becoming the new leaders and owners of new companies and moving on in their careers, what do they do without that? Because we had that when we came up. So is there tech, AI, what have you, that can aid in the connection as opposed to separating is the end question.
So I'll let Tony answer because he probably knows best, but I'll just speak from the Blavity point of view. So we're very even though we're a 100% remote company and we leverage technology to keep us closer, we're very intentional about creating one-on-one human connections and finding ways, whether it is, we're all over the world at this point, but finding if we're doing local meetups with our staff so that we can have connections. We do mentoring. Our CEO sits down with a group of 10 people a quarter and does one-on-one conversations. So just as important that technology is, it's equally as important to create those human connection moments. And so I think you just have to be very intentional about that in a virtual world.
Yeah, wow. I mean, we're struggling with that now, trying to get people back to the office. And again, a couple things. One, just the cross-generational nature of, we've got like 4 or 5 generations all sort of like in the workplace at the same time, and people have very different definitions of what work actually is and what it needs to be, depending on sort of the role is played. So, and I struggle a little bit with, you don't need to come to work so I can watch you do your job, right? At the same time, the technology allows people to be in a bunch of different places. But to your point, there's something kinetic and dynamic that happens when people are together, and you have to be really intentional about how you get people to come in, because it's not about you have to come in, it's about you want to come in because some cool shit's about to happen while you're here. And there's some people you need to meet, and the world is like 3-dimensional when you're here. It's not people on a screen. And that, like the story we have to tell people in order to get them to do that, in some ways it has to be a little different depending on what the barrier is. And we're still working through that. So, I mean, I get the benefits of not going to work every day. I got little kids, so like I get to make them breakfast every morning. I get to be home for dinner. So, I mean, like that sort of, the answer is not the same answer for everybody, all right?
Agreed and agreed. I like to say that I became a great software developer on my own, but I became an incredible software developer inside of a business. That business was Apple, which kind of makes sense, but it was from being around people that were way more experienced than I am. So I fully understand what you're expressing and what you're explaining with the idea of getting young people in, but you also have to make it worth their while. It's not, there's absolutely no point in having people come in and it's a 1 hour catch up a week, and that's why they need to be in 5 days a week. There needs to be a reason why there is 3, 4, 5 days out of the week that they want to see somebody who's experienced, they want to learn from somebody who's more experienced than them, or they just want to be around what the nucleus of that business. And sometimes some businesses just aren't interesting and people don't want to come in, and you have to deal with that fact and not try and, okay, there's muffins now on Fridays. That does not work. No one cares. People would rather buy a $10 muffin their own than go into an office that's given them for free. So make it worth their while, if it is worth their while, because you can't fake this. And yeah, anything else I say further would just be reiterating what those two beautiful people said. So it's a combination of all of those things, I believe.
And that is all we have time for today. So thank you all. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the programming.